From the creation of the printing press to the telegraph to radio and television, each new form of media revolutionized society. But the development of the internet far surpassed all previous communication technologies, especially since it's now fully mobile and in our pocket wherever we go. It's changed almost everything from how we interact with our friends to how we get our news and entertainment. And now most people gauge which topics and events are most popular based solely on whether or not they're trending on social media. Futurist George Gilder noted that, quote, computer networks give every hacker the creative potential of a factory tycoon of the industrial era and the communications power of a TV magnate of the broadcasting era. That's the capability of what's been dubbed Internet 2.0, or the two-way communication networks the internet now enables, instead of just static websites. Comedian Dane Cook was one of the first comics to use social media to promote himself in the early 2000s through MySpace, and many of his early critics called him a better marketer than a comic because they didn't see his humor as all that funny, but couldn't deny his popularity, which was largely because he was an early adopter of the newly emerging social media technology. Similarly, Tila Tequila became the most popular person on MySpace in 2006 from posting racy photos of herself, taking advantage of the new medium, and getting floods of friend requests from lonely losers online who hoped to connect with her in some way. Her popularity on MySpace opened the door for her dating show A Shot at Love with Tila Tequila on MTV in 2007, which began her 15 minutes of fame, which thankfully ran out soon after. In the early years of social media, most people just saw the technology as something to use for fun and as a way to entertain themselves or reconnect with old friends. But as time went on, the true ability to influence large numbers of people through it became apparent. Amateur video caught Hillary Clinton collapsing at the 9/11 memorial after her campaign, and the mainstream media kept dismissing growing concerns that there was something wrong with her health in the final stretch of the 2016 presidential election. The video first went viral through social media before finally getting covered in the mainstream press because so many people were talking about it. The Washington Post, which had been calling questions about her health conspiracy theories, then finally admitted that Hillary Clinton's health just became a real issue in the presidential campaign. A bartender working at a fundraiser held by Mitt Romney in 2012 captured the then presidential candidate on video talking about how 47% of the country wouldn't vote for him because they'll support Obama no matter what, since they want free handouts, so he wasn't going to pay much attention to them. Liberals pretended to be outraged and accused Mitt of not caring about half the country, particularly lower class income folks, and the video proved to be quite damaging to his campaign. Bloggers were the ones who first debunked the fake documents CBS News anchor Dan Rather claimed were the service records of George W. Bush from his time in the National Guard. Matt Drudge's Drudge Report website first broke the Monica Lewinsky scandal when other outlets like Newsweek were sitting on the story and refused to cover it. That's how powerful the internet has become. Facebook and Google now account for 25% of all advertising spending, both online and off. Social media has swallowed up the news business, and the power shift has been revolutionary. Despite the big tech companies being an integral part of most people's lives, unlike almost every other company that offers products or services to the public, there are no customer service phone numbers at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Google. You can't get anyone on the phone to talk with them about the problems you've experienced or the grievances you have with the companies. Despite names like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey attached to them, they remain faceless corporations you can't get in touch with. There's no local branch you can visit where you can ask to speak with a manager, and instead users are relegated to sending tweets or submitting a help ticket from within the app's dashboard, and those attempts to get answers often only result in automated responses thanking you for contacting them and saying that they'll try to look into it. The social media giants are strangely antisocial, and over the last 4 years have been increasingly wielding their editorial powers to control which posts people see and how many people can see certain posts. And since the 2016 election, we've seen a record number of conservatives completely banned from platforms for having the wrong opinions or posting uncomfortable facts about certain segments of the population. The tech giants are even censoring memes that they've deemed offensive and don't want people to see. There are several classic books that highlight the dangers of censorship and depict tyrannical governments that use their endless power to snuff out any opposition in hopes of maintaining their control over society. George Orwell's 1984, which was first published in 1949, and Fahrenheit 451, published in 1953, are two of the most popular examples and weren't just written for entertainment. They were meant to serve as a warning of what giant bureaucracies could do if their growing power goes unchecked. But today in America, it's not the government that's censoring what newspapers print or what airs on the evening news. It's Silicon Valley titans. It's Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, and Susan Wojcicki. In the marketplace of ideas, they are losing. And so these industry leaders are silencing influential opponents who speak out against the left's attempted cultural revolution. They're also trying to create a chilling effect by scaring people into not speaking out about certain issues or think twice before sharing certain information on social media out of fear that we'll be socially ostracized or even fired from our jobs. So many people are self-censoring themselves in what's been called the spiral of silence. The fewer people who speak out about an issue due to the fear of repercussions causes others who feel that they should say something to be more apprehensive about doing so because nobody else seems to be doing it, which in turn causes even more people to stay silent, causing the false impression that nobody seems to be opposed to what's happening. Thankfully, in the United States, at least today, the First Amendment is still intact, but in places like Canada, Germany, England, Scotland, and other supposedly free countries, people are being arrested and charged with hate speech crimes for posting things on their social media accounts that are critical of the Islamization of Europe from the mass influx of Muslim refugees, and for voicing their opposition to the LGBT agenda, and for other things you're not supposed to think. But while Americans are still technically free to say these things without getting arrested, there are other serious consequences since we're living in an online world where most people rely on a handful of apps to communicate with others. Back in 1997, Harvard law professor Larry Lessig wrote an article for Wired magazine titled "Tyranny in the Infrastructure," warning that, quote, "Laws affect the pace of technological change, but the structures of software can do even more to curtail freedom. In the long run," he said, "the shackles built by programmers could well constrain us even more." In his book Cyber Ethics, Morality and Law in Cyberspace, Richard A. Spinello expanded on this concern, saying, quote, "This notion that private code can be a more potent constraining force than public law has significant implications. The use of code as a surrogate for law may mean that certain public goods or moral values once protected by law will now be ignored or compromised by those who develop or utilize the code." And that's where we find ourselves today. Technically, private companies can ban people from their platforms as long as it's not because of their race, sex, sexual orientation, age, disability, country of origin, or other legally protected class, but political affiliation is not a protected class, and companies could legally ban all Republicans or all Trump supporters if they wanted to. Laws and regulations are always many years behind innovation, and the framers of the legislation governing our communication infrastructure could have never imagined the emergence of social media, let alone how instrumental of a role it would play in our lives. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Clinton in order to overhaul the rules and the regulations governing communication systems in response to the development of the internet. Within the act was a subsection called the Communications Decency Act, and Section 230 of the law granted immunity to internet service providers, domain registrars, and website hosting services. So if customers used these services in ways that violate copyright laws or criminal statutes, the companies themselves are not liable for the legal consequences because they're not deemed publishers but platforms and are not responsible for what their customers are posting. In other words, if somebody posts an episode of the Big Bang Theory television show on the YouTube channel, YouTube is not responsible for that person violating CBS's copyright as long as YouTube promptly removes the infringing video once notified by CBS, if they're notified. Because YouTube provides a service, i.e. the platform to the public, they can't necessarily prevent people from using that service to post copyrighted material. So they're given safe harbor and are immune from any civil or criminal penalties when their users break the law. Section 230 of the CDA also granted immunity to internet service providers and interactive websites if third-party users post defamatory information about someone, or even if they sell fake merchandise on eBay, meaning eBay is not responsible, only the person posting the fake listing. Today, many big tech companies are abusing their immunity that's granted to them by Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act by censoring certain posts and deciding themselves what to delete from their platforms when that content is not violating any laws. They're now acting as publishers, not platforms, because they're making editorial decisions about what will and will not be allowed. If a person posts something that doesn't violate any laws, then why should the social media companies have the right to take it down if they're they're in the business of offering a platform for supposedly anyone to use. Currently, there's a loophole in Section 230 that allows for what it calls Good Samaritan blocking and screening of obscene, lewd, excessively violent, or otherwise objectionable content. So these big tech companies interpret objectionable content as being facts or opinions that hurt liberals' feelings or undermine the liberal agenda. Further evidence that Section 230 of the CDA is outdated and unfair can be seen in the fact that a court ruled that President Trump can't block people on Twitter after several trolls who he had blocked found a law firm that sued the president on their behalf. The court ruled that Trump can't block people on social media because it deprives them of access to official presidential statements, and his feeds are considered to be a public square. This begs the question, why is Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube allowed to deprive citizens access to the same public square? If the President of the United States can't deprive someone of access to his statements on social media, why should the tech companies be allowed to do that to ordinary citizens? Facebook and Twitter are basically the modern-day equivalent of a telephone or a post office. They've become an intimate and crucial part of billions of people's lives. It's how friends and family communicate with each other and share photos and videos. It's how they send out party invitations and look up old friends or family members they've lost touch with. It's how they get their news, and it's how they see what the president is saying. Imagine the phone company canceling your service because they didn't like what you and your friends talked about. That's essentially what Facebook and other social media platforms are doing today when they suspend people, delete their posts, or ban them completely because of what they say when their statements are not crimes, but just a controversial, divisive, or quote, hateful point of view. The power these mega corporations have over billions of people on the planet to communicate with each other is staggering, and the fact that they're working in concert together to enforce their arbitrary terms of service to silence certain people and certain points of view is beyond horrifying. For years, I've been warning people about this, but it wasn't really until last week when the New York Post had their story about Hunter Biden's laptop censored that most people finally started paying attention. Let's just hope it's not too late, because, let's be honest, it might be. If you like my serious presentation here, you'll really enjoy my books. The liberal media industrial complex came out last year and details the censorship and manipulation by the big tech companies. And I have a brand new one out called Hollywood Propaganda, How TV, Movies, and Music Shape Our Culture. And there's a lot of information in those books that you're not going to find here on my YouTube channel because it would probably get me into trouble. So if you guys enjoy watching my videos, I know you're going to like the books. So order them in paperback from Amazon.com or download the ebook from Kindle, Google Play, iBooks, or Nook. And of course, there's a link in the description below to the Amazon listing, so head on over there and check them out.